Yeah, the paper that Barry and I are presenting is entitled Pluriversality and Beyond, Consolidating Radical Alternatives to Maldevelopment as a Communist Project. I will cover mostly in my presentation the theoretical framework of the first bit of the paper, which is a little bit condensed and abstract and a little bit boring. So I appreciate your patience, but then I hope that I will leave enough time for Barry to cast some lights on the arguments and make them a little bit more interesting by talking about the case study that he has himself personally been involved. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge and express my respect and acknowledgement of the Aboriginal land on which the campuses of my university and my residential district are located. I hereby demand the education of the public about the past and present losses and injustices, advocate for social equity, and denounce the ongoing discriminations. And I call for collective striving toward a more just and inclusive future. Well, to be honest, because the paper is very long and that section that I'm presenting is very abstract, I found it very difficult to actually summarize it in just 5 or 10 minutes. So I thought that I would just walk you through the sections and talk to you a little bit about the way that it is structured. Hopefully, it will make you interested in reading it when it comes out. In the beginning of the paper, we have discussed that the global crisis that we are witnessing is more than just a systemic crisis. It's a civilizational crisis, and it has 5 important components that are very much intertwined. Using Escobar's terms, they are radically interdependent, and that's this civilizational dependence on capital, replacing labor as the ultimate source of value, this inherent dependence on carbon, symbolizing fossil fuels, and more generally speaking, extractivism, dependence on compulsive growth, coloniality as the extension of colonialism into our modern time, and corruptive politics, or you may call it plutocracy. So these are, our argument is that these are very intertwined, very interdependent, and as the result of that, we need responses. You know, what we should expect responses that would address each one of these elements. Fortunately, there is no shortage of responses and resistance and transformative movements. We can respectively categorize them into decapitalization movements, decarbonization, degrowth, decolonization, and decorrupting the politics through more radical democratization of the politics, and also the extension of democracy to the economy. We call them the 5 Ds against the former 5 Cs. And again, our argument is that this is great. You know, this is what is expected and needed, but it's not adequate because according to our argument, a civilizational crisis requires a civilizational shift. And as the result of the interdependence of the 5 Cs, these 5 Ds are actually very recuperative. They want to recover the system from the illnesses, from the sicknesses, whereas what we need, considering that the situation is highly civilizational, is that we need to actually, we need more originative rather than restorative or recuperative movement. So to be originative, we are dealing with this dilemma of, you know, how to integrate and how to actually reimagine the civilization. In this process of reimagining civilization, we face with the dilemma of how to actually bring together the unity and diversity. And diversity has been one of the advantages of the resistance, especially what we call the pluriverse. So the solutions to this dilemma is, one is a top-down intellectual project of creating a universal meta-narrative. And we know that this has failed in the 20th century. We don't want to go down the path of repeating the mistakes. It has a great, potential to actually become very despotic. The second, which seems to be very popular among the forces of the pluriverse, is that, these expectations that magically out of the interaction between alternatives, some kind of transformation, general transformation will finally emerge. And we thought that this possibly mostly resembles the kind of a logic that free market actually has normalized. So our argument is that the popular expectation and out of the marketplace of interactions between countless forms of post-capital alternatives, somehow magically a new paradigm will arise that eventually ends the supreme rule of capital before it ends organized life, ironically resembles the core neoliberal myth of the invisible hand and the trickle-down fairy tale. What would be then the solution? We thought maybe perhaps one solution would be to offer some kind of a framework, a general framework to organize and structure conversations to help many of these movements to become more self-reflective, to find their positions in that framework, and to explore the potentialities that they can actually achieve or realize by collaborating with other movements. Where would that framework come? We thought that perhaps with some reflection on what constitutes as civilizations in the first place, that can be helpful in terms of creating the framework. So we considered 4 elements for every civilization. These are the modes of being and living, willing and enabling, liaising and learning, becoming and begetting. And then we have offered some definitions of what we exactly mean by these sort of things. I'm not sure if I have time to read them out, but for instance, the mode of being and living determines how a civilization should meet the essential requirements of living well for its human members, non-human living beings, and so on and so forth. Mode of willing and being determines how a civilization should autonomously make decisions. And then mode of liaising and learning determines the ways through which individuals, collective and institutions interact. Mode of becoming and begetting determines how a civilization and its members evolve out of and move beyond the prevailing socio-ecological structures, and so on and so forth. This would actually help us to have a kind of this framework potentially can provide us with kind of a conceptual platform where we can actually create or co-create some knowledges together with the grassroots movements. So in this way, these interactions would perhaps help us to overcome that dilemma of the diversity versus unity, and would help the movements to rise up to the levels of a systemic challenge and amount to a systemic shift in terms of all the above for fundamental aspects of civilization. So then applying those 4 elements to in terms of, in providing such a framework for conversation, reflection, and creation of synergic collaborations or plans, we have developed this and then that can be actually used as a way for assessing any experience that tries to create any knowledge commons or create some commons or tries to common the alternatives, and Barry will reflect on some examples like the People's Sovereignty Network, and will try to relate it to each one of the elements of our framework. So the first frame set is, this framework is about, creating self-sufficient modes of livelihood or subsistence, meaning being and living, independent from detrimental forces of private capital and plutocracies, based on egalitarian, self-sustaining socio-ecological systems of redistribution and reproduction that promote well-living. Now, scale is central matter when it comes to autonomous eco-sufficiency, as in the most cases, self-sufficiency is impossible at the local level due to the limitations of resources and the complexity of modern life. Co-determining modes of governance, willing and enabling, that effectively translate internal conflicts and divisive disparities in decision-making into cohesive solidarities, consensus building processes, and collective will to freedom. To achieve this, it is central to normatively conceptualize the state and the market as commons, i.e. entities that need to be recommened. This way, there will be less space for conflict over the scale of democracy. And then finally, transversal modes of sociality, liaising and learning, capable of producing cooperative solidarities and egalitarian systems of mutual recognition and knowledge making across identities and ideologies. New notions of commons have already started to be extended into the realms of the social, cultural, and technological. And then finally, number 4, transformative modes of praxis to decommodify social relations, co-strategize political actions of larger scale, intentionally planned for paving the way for the realization of place-based or particularistic projects, and thereby co-realize post-capitalist utopian visions. Yeah, I mean, this it may sound idealistic, but it provides us with kind of an ideal, typical conceptual framework that can be possibly applied. And I apologize for if it sounds a little bit too abstract or too sophisticated. And I hope I have left enough time for Barry to reflect more on the case study. Thank you so much for your patience.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Hamid. Thank you very much. I think you did a wonderful job of presenting the paper, and I hope people will be able to look at the paper later. Maybe we could put in the chat how they might find it in due course. But I'm just going to speak a few moments about experience, which I've been engaged in the last several years, which is the People's Sovereignty Network, which was conceptualized to be a South-South and South-North process of dialogic solidarity building and transformative praxis, and to create a common education project or an education commons in co-construction of knowledge as equals, particularly emphasizing the voice of and leadership of the activists around the Global South on the ground who are at the cutting edge or sharp end of local struggles in the face of authoritarianism, extractivism, and other forces that would destroy their life world. We are committed to transversality, but most of all, it's a process. So the idea is that we're trying to build a community which is in constant self-reflective and self-critical dialogue about how to reach common understandings of the crises, the forces that are faced, and strategies for addressing them, and ways of creating alternative spaces where people can live their life well and resist, in a sense, the forces of the crisis, the multiple crises. So it involves activists from across the world, from all the continents, I think, and including indigenous peoples, particularly from the Americas. And there are some academics, a few, who are in a minority. And the idea, again, is that this is not led by the academics telling others, the paradigm that they ought to adopt and so on. Quite the contrary, it's based on active respect and listening and going into a process of learning with one another to reach new sets of common understandings and try to arrive at collective action strategies, which are being discussed and shared across the network. I mean, it's only a small network in relation to so many networks around the world, but as in our article, we talk about that pluriverse is not something that we're radically criticizing, but we're saying that needs to be gone beyond. So those temporary pragmatic alliances and coalitions are replete around the planet. I mean, they've been going on for decades, but something more is needed precisely because of the comprehensiveness and integratedness of all the various crisis vectors that we discussed in the paper. Something very radical is needed. Something that actually creates a kind of convergences and multiple convergences that are more or less permanent. And so this is very ambitious, but also we think it's imperative, because the crisis that we face, if you take our argument seriously, and not only us, many other people are saying similar things, this civilizational crisis is so comprehensive and overwhelming that it requires no less than truly radical, in fact, utopian imagination, and not just a recuperative or reiterative restoration of the system as it exists, because that will not be sufficient. In any way, isn't really something to fight for in a way. We need to go further. So the argument is based on that, but essentially I'll just say it's a process that you commit yourself to, like the People's Sovereignty Network. You set up the web lab, the People's Sovereignty Web Lab, and a mosaic of concerns and patterns, and it's a constant ongoing process of discussion between us on a regular basis of where to take the dialogue next and what kinds of actions we could create. And in the co-construction of knowledge, I'll just say that's a serious commitment. And so like, for example, Globalization's Journal did a special forum some months ago with articles that were created through this People's Sovereignty Network process, where co-constructions of knowledge and where the articles are actually led by the experiences on the ground of real struggles, where the academics just assist, in effect, in a way of formulation or template of the way of you present such ideas to a wider, and in this case, mainly academic audience. But so we've done one iteration in that way, and then we're building up other materials on the web lab and moving forward. So I just wanted to put it like that. And this is where praxis, your actual engagement in the process, dialogic, praxis-oriented methodologies of co-construction of knowledge, to work towards multi-convergences using transversality, to address the kind of comprehensive and radical transformative change that's necessary. So PSN is just one small instance of that. Last thing I'll say is that recently, many of you may have been attending the World Social Forum online. I did. And I attended a very interesting set of conversations about multi-convergences, where there were sort of 7 or 8 major global multi-convergence networks who were there in the discussion from different parts of the world, and it were different networks. But we've gotten to the point where people can actually meet and discuss multi-convergence amongst multi-convergences. Where that conversation goes is open, but also very, very important. And also the other one is that there's a group formed to renew and reform the World Social Forum, to make the World Social Forum hopefully much more proactive as a subject that can act politically and actually plan and implement collective action on collective understandings reached dialogically, but between activists from all over the world, which has been resisted for a long, long, long time. Some of you will know how torturous this has been for 20 years. But now there's yet another new attempt to try to do that and use the World Social Forum as one of the major emergent spaces in the world in which this kind of thing can actually happen. Okay, thanks. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Hamed, and thank you so much, Barry.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks.
It was really